Hello, I'm Jennifer Summers, a producer here at Alaska's News Source. There's a new exhibit at the Anchorage Museum, Cold War to the Cosmos. And Sierra Young of the museum is also a Star Trek fan. And so we got together and talked about Star Trek and how it relates to the Cold War. And we started with a question about how the Cold War impacted Alaska.
I would say the Cold War was a political and cultural divide between the United States and the Soviet Union. Um, it's considered cold because instead of fighting each other directly, we fought via what were called proxy states. Those are wars like Vietnam and Korea, where we tried to win over different countries to follow our way of life, be that capitalism or communism. And we let kind of the different factions in those countries fight it out rather than us fighting directly. We did not want to fight directly since the invention of atomic weaponry would have led to World War III.
Mhm. But we did still build up an arsenal.
We did. However, we didn't want to have to use them because we followed something called MAD, which is mutually assured destruction, which is the idea that if one of us used our nukes, we had enough to essentially end the war and end the world.
And the world and a whole multiple generations grew up under the shadow of the Cold War and are terrified of this mutual destruction. It wasn't just kids in the 50s going under their desk. It was the next generation as well that was afraid of the bomb and the red buttons and
Yeah,
that.
I'm part of the generation, the first generation that didn't have that fear. But I grew up hearing stories from my father because he was stationed in Germany and he would write short stories in his spare time about what he imagined World War III would look like because it was a very real threat for people at the time.
Let's talk about the Cold War and Alaska specifically. And this is the exhibit that's at the museum now.
Yes. So Alaska was a very strategic location. One, because of its proximity to the Soviet Union. Um, Two, because we had a lot of land that could be used to practice war games. Also practice in a environment that's similar to Russia or the Soviet Union in case we ever had to invade. Um, it allowed us to test weaponry and techniques that, maybe down in the lower 48 in a more populated area, people would feel uncomfortable being that close to. Um, and then in Anchorage, we had three and Fairbanks five Nike Hercules missile sites that were used to defend um, from the possibility of Soviet attack. The ones in Anchorage opened in 1959, and at least the site point, the one at Kincaid Park today, um, each one of the bunkers at Kincaid Park would have held 10 Hiroshima strength nuclear weapons, and those would have been used to shoot down any possible incoming Soviet bombers that would have been holding their own nuclear weapons to drop on military sites in Alaska and in the lower 48. Um, so if the DEW line, the distant early warning line, up in the northern reaches of in the North Slope, Canada, Greenland, etc., if they had picked up an incoming Soviet bomber formation, they would have alerted the NORAD headquarters in Alaska. And then if as a last resort we needed to, we could utilize our Nike missiles against those bombers.
I can't imagine what that would do to Alaska.
Yeah, so when I was first starting to study up on this topic, I also was concerned about that. The kind of plan, because thank God we never actually had to use a real one. We've done tests of, the mechanisms and whatnot, but we've never had to actually detonate a nuclear weapon, um, at least in this setting. Um, the the plan was is that because the bombers would have been flying at such a high altitude, that the fallout wouldn't be as significant as if the nuclear weapon went off at ground level or slightly above ground level. We're talking like miles above Earth. Um, However, the threat of fallout is still there. And from the veterans that I've talked to, the kind of assumption was just that Willow, which was kind of at the furthest extent of the range of these weapons in Anchorage, would have been seen as collateral damage.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. I was wondering too if some of the reasons why these were stations in Alaska. I know there are Nike sites around the country as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
but the population up here probably didn't have big a voice or knowledge of what was going on as people in the lower 48.
So I've heard tell that a lot of people actually felt, well, the people that knew that there were nuclear weapons on the base, they felt relatively comforted by it, knowing that there was at least some form of prevention. Um, the thing is, is, they didn't know all of the nitty-gritty details. Even the people that worked on these new Nike Hercules sites, they were on a need-to-know basis. So they only knew their very small kind of chunk of the pie, because they didn't need to know the full extent of things, as a way to prevent espionage and whatnot.
And panic, maybe.
Yeah, and panic.
Lots of secrets. That's kind of scary. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we talked about the Nike missile sites. What about the White Alice sites? There, I know the one at Nome is still up. It's like a landmark, but tell us what
Yeah.
they did. That was the
So,
early warning.
so the distant early warning sites were up along the North Slope into Canada, Greenland, and the way that the DEW line sites was they were able to communicate with the NORAD headquarters, was via the White Alice communication system. That's why sometimes they're abbreviated as WAC or WAC. Um, and it allowed radio signals to travel further than with what was at the time standard operating radio. I'm not 100% on all of the physics involved with how these radios worked. I just know that it somehow helped counteract the curvature of the Earth and allowed the radio signals to travel further.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be above my head anyway.
Yeah.
Definitely my pay grade. Let's talk about Star Trek. So we have this war raging that's cold, and we're also getting, is it propaganda or commentary from pop culture?
I would say more commentary, because the comments are not always in favor of the United States. It's not just blindly agreeing with everything the United States has to say in real life. Um, I would say, in fact, it's more of a critique on the United States. It's saying that this is what they believed was the potential of the United States if it lived up to kind of their standards, and we have the opportunity to be, this force of good in the universe, if we learn from our mistakes. And in the case of Star Trek, a lot of the commentary was talking about things like Vietnam and race relations and whatnot, and saying like, oh, look how foolish this is. If we put this behind us, we could do bigger and better things and go forth into the universe, the final frontier and all that.
Interesting that we're the last frontier and
Yeah,
space is the
exactly.
final
Yeah.
frontier. Star Trek, of course, a short-lived TV series, science fiction. Gene Roddenberry was the creator. Um, I had no idea. I watched it as a little kid, of course, and had no idea that it was a social commentary. I just watched it for the entertainment value.
Yeah, funnily enough, when I was a kid, I think I watched it and was like, is anybody else picking this up? Like, Like, to me, it was very obvious because growing up in the South, particularly the issues that had to do with race, it was very obvious to me, like what it was talking about. I think maybe if you were not in that kind of situation, in that sort of environment, maybe it would have been more veiled. But to me, it was obvious. And then it even got worse when I got older and, knew more about the world and history and whatnot. Um, the thing is that at the time that Star Trek came out, science fiction as a whole was not taken seriously. It was seen as something that it was for young people, teenagers. It was, it wasn't worth the censor's time. And because of that, it wasn't as heavily censored as, say, like a drama would be. That being said, in the 1960s, the three major television networks still were extremely reluctant to cover anything remotely controversial. So, science fiction writers, while they were not taken as seriously as other forms of media, they did still have to couch their messages in metaphor. So, Gene Roddenberry, in fact, stated, like in an interview in 1979, he said, quote, TV was so tightly censored that science fiction was the only way to escape the taboos in politics, religion, or anything else that was considered controversial, end quote.
Interesting.
Yeah, the
Interesting.
the writers, Gene Roddenberry, the other story writers, they were very forthcoming later on as to what exactly like they were doing. Um, in my talk, I talk about the recent meme called Blue Curtains, which is this meme going around the internet where it's kind of teasing about how oftentimes like English teachers, for example, will say like, what do the blue curtains mean? And you'll say, oh, it represents the depression of the main character or whatnot. And then the meme is that sometimes the blue curtains are just blue. Sometimes there's no deeper meaning. And I'm pleading the case that this is not a case of blue curtains, that it is really that deep because we know via quotes and interviews that there was this metaphor that was necessary at the time to tell the stories that they wanted to tell.
Interesting. Did they get blowback from that from the government at all?
I do know that there were quite a few pushes, particularly in the South, to get Star Trek banned from television stations. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. I
It-
didn't know that. And of course, it was short-lived. So
Yeah, and there were also controversies about everything from whether or not the women should be allowed to show their belly buttons in their costumes. I mean, it was a different time in television at that moment.
I, I watched an episode last night and I read somewhere that they had to glue the costumes on some of the women because everything was so risque. They didn't want to
Yeah.
risk a malfunction.
Nothing much has changed there, I guess.
No, but they were pretty, I mean, those skirts were short.
Yeah, definitely.
Star Trek. So I lost my own train of thought.
It's okay.
Um, can you speak about some of the episodes maybe about Star Trek that were
Okay.
obviously
Uh,
commentaries?
so one of the episodes that we'll be screening at the Anchorage Museum is called Errand of Mercy. This is the episode that introduces the Klingons. The Klingons were a lot different looking than they are nowadays. They are just normal men that are painted with shoe polish and wearing very long mustaches. And the creator of this species is Gene Coons. He's quoted as saying, "We have always played them very much like the Russians." In the Star Trek Writer's Guidebook, they're described as, quote, a species whose cruelty is something admirable and honor is a despicable trait, end quote. Um, in this episode, um, the Federation, so that would be Starfleet, the group that Captain Kirk represents, um, is kind of arguing over the control of a Planet that's in the kind of disputed territory, in much the way that in the Cold War, the Soviets and the United States were vying for territory and political control over places like Vietnam and Korea. The Klingons and the Federation are fighting over this planet. And Captain Kirk gets quite frustrated that the planet is not as easily swayed by his pitch to join the Federation as he thinks that they should be. He offers them things like better schools, better infrastructure, the same things that the United States would have offered what at the time were called developing or third world countries as kind of leverage to join the side of democracy and capitalism and whatnot.
Um, the beings were smarter than him, though. Is that the episode where
Yeah, it
they
turns out
turn
that
out to
they're
be?
actually not like they're like a sort of nebulous being that exists outside of three-dimensional space and whatnot. And they were put there as sort of a test for both sides to kind of prove to them, how foolish it would be to start this war that would have caused the death of, millions of people in the Beta and Alpha Quadrant.
Interesting. I don't know that I gave away the plot. I maybe shouldn't have said that, but
I mean, a spoiler alert has been out for 40 something years or whatever it is.
right, 60. It's been
Oh gosh, wow.
it debuted 60 years ago in August, I believe. Star Trek did. This is a really stupid question, but is that why everyone with red shirts died? Because it was dangerous to be a red?
I mean, I never really thought about that now that you say it. Yeah, it's interesting that that was the color that was picked. That does change later on. Like the sort of department representation changes later on because like each color represents a different department in Starfleet. So that does change like after the original series. Um, but yeah,
And
I'm not.
Scotty always wore red too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Scotty had a free pass. For some reason, he was safe. Honestly just think that because they picked that security was red in the original series, like they were cannon fodder, so to speak. But who knows? Maybe there is some deep, like, psychological stuff going on there that, subconsciously they picked red because it was anti-Soviet. I'm not sure.
Maybe. What else about Star Trek do you want to talk about?
So there's a lot of different species in Star Trek. We talked about how the Klingons represent the Russians. However, there's also the Romulans. In the Star Trek guidebook, they're described as being highly militaristic and aggressive by nature. They were allied with the Klingons, so the Soviets, the Russians. It's been argued that the Romulans represent China, North Korea, or some sort of like combination of the two. In fact, the Romulans even have their own demilitarized zone, similar to North and South Korea, called the Romulan Neutral Zone. With the Romulans, they had access to technology that the Federation did not have access to. This mirrors sort of the concern during the Cold War that the United States was always falling behind and this constant desire and drive to maintain technological superiority over the Soviet Union. So, this need for the Federation to acquire the Romulans tech, it very much mirrors what the United States was doing in its attempt to always have the biggest and the best and the most nuclear weapons. The United Federation of Planets was sort of the idealized version of the United States, where it was a collection of diverse cultures that not just tolerated each other, but respected each other and celebrated each other. Um, the Federation was very, I would say, not just focused on Earth, but specifically on the United States. In the metaphor, in that the Federation was founded, Starfleet was founded not just on Earth, but specifically in San Francisco. Um, They make references in some episodes to the United States. Um, and in a way, the United States sort of serves as the representative for all of Earth. And I think that that's kind of coming through with sort of American exceptionalism, like American ethnocentrism in a way, that was very prevalent during the 60s. Like, it was like, no, like our way is the best. Like, we are, um, you know, pure democracy. We have these values. In one of the episodes that we'll watch, Captain Kirk, holds up documents from our founding fathers and says, like these values are for everybody. They're not just for one group or another. And if you claim that they're for one group or another, then you're not doing it right. you know, um, you can't just play willy-nilly like, oh, well, some groups get rights and some groups don't. Um, so things that at the time hold up American values, but also kind of call out things like civil rights, right? Like, you can make the same argument. Well, how is it that, America has these amazing values, but some groups have them and some groups don't, right? So Star Trek both kind of supports the idea that America is a good place, but also calls out hypocrisy in our system.
What are the three episodes you talked about? Two. What are the other?
We're just watching two. We're watching Errand of Mercy and The Omega Glory.
Omega. That's amazing. I just love this correlation and the Cold War is, to me, is so deep and so full of secrets. And it's like, I don't know that we even know all the things that went on still.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see history.
I mean, outside of my work at the Anchorage Museum, I volunteer with Friends of Nike Site Summit, and we partner with them as the museum. And the veterans that served at the Nike sites, they, for the first time, like publicly talked about their jobs in like the 2010s. I think it's like 2014. So it wasn't until then that they felt comfortable to even talk about it in public. And even still, some veterans refuse to speak about it because they never got the official go-ahead from higher ups.
Amazing.
So it's like
Amazing.
very obvious, like everybody knows that there were nukes at, Kincaid and up on the mountain and whatnot. There's some that still don't feel comfortable discussing it.
I did the Friends of Nike site tour at Utter Valley. Is that the name of it? Yeah. It was fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
Important history.
Yeah, Site Summit, they're working on preserving that. That property is still owned by the military, so they're doing the best they can with working within the military's parameters.
Okay. And Kincaid is not?
Kincaid, of course, belongs to the municipality because it's, the park. That was turned over, I believe, in 81. It was decommissioned in 79. And then I believe it's went over to the Muni in 81, I believe.
79 is within my lifetime. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Can we just in the little time that we have left talk about the exhibit that's going on, the Cold War exhibit, and what it focuses on?
Sure. So Cold War to the Cosmos is a temporary exhibition at the Anchorage Museum. It will be open until later this fall. It focuses on Alaska's role in the Cold War, but also where Earth and humans are moving forward into the future. So kind of starting on Earth and basing it in our past and our history, and then kind of moving forward into speculative, like where are we going into the future? So talking about, travel to Mars, and there's this concept built into the exhibition about this idea that Earth is a spaceship that we're all on, and that if our spaceship fails, we will be lost in space as a species, right? So, is the answer to take care of our spaceship, or is the answer to try to find a new spaceship through Mars and further space exploration? So, it touches on both the past, our present, and our future, where we're going as a species.
I'm like so impressed with all the research that you've done. Is there anything that I'm leaving out that you want to cover?
Um, I don't I don't think so. I'm pretty sure we covered all of it. Just,
Okay.
I'm a Trekkie. I'm a nerd who did a lot of research. I'm not some sort of, I got a Star Trek tattoo to prove it.
Oh my gosh.
It says live long and prosper in Vulcan. Um,
That's hardcore.
so in that way, I have some street cred on the topic, but I'm sure that there are people that know a lot more about Star Trek than I do. That's why I'm focusing specifically on the original series, because you can get lost in the vast amount of lore on Star Trek.
What's your favorite episode? Do you have a favorite?
Mm, can't really pick. It depends on what mood I'm in. Like,
Right.
yeah. Zakia, do you have a favorite episode?
I like the episode where Kirk and is it Uhura
Uh-huh.
when they kiss.
When they kiss, yeah.
Because
So,
fun fact about that, they just kept kissing.
oh, really?
In the tapes, they just kept kissing.
Oh, wow.
And so they were like, fine, we'll leave it in. Because it was the first.
Yeah, so yeah, that kiss was the first interracial kiss on like network television. So yeah, like Star Trek was full of historical moments, which is saying something because it was only on the air for what, 3 years, 3 seasons at least. So yeah,
Yeah, and the networks didn't want to do it. It had to be
yeah, it
done
was really
through-
expensive, it went over budget all the time. Um, it cost a lot of drama. They really had to even fight to get it made originally. Like Lucille Ball is like played a big part in getting it made, which I think is its really own, its own interesting story, but we don't have time to talk about that. But yeah, I could yap endlessly about my love for Star Trek.